constituted at the secretariat, at the guidance of the board, the Neiti Validation Committee, made up of staff in relevant schedules in various departments. And the work of that committee was to coordinate the secretariat response, working under the supervision of the board to our validation arrangements. There was also a shadow committee which was set up. The work of the shadow committee was to conduct a kind of mock exercise to identify where the gaps are. All these committees are in place and they are still working. The validation committee drew a plan and timetable of engagement with stakeholders, and the NSWG on its own also constituted an ad hoc committee made up of members of NSWG to review the Neiti submissions, the secretariat submissions in terms of populating the templates. So far, 3 stakeholders engagements have been held. The civil society engagement of validation held on the 13th of September. The Neiti Companies Forum Sensitization Workshop held on the 20th of September, also in Lagos, and the board ad hoc committee on validation meeting, which has been also been holding consultations. The validation committee had subgroups filling in different templates. There's a subgroup on transparency templates, which they are also almost completing. And there's a subcommittee on stakeholders and outcome and impact template. The subgroups worked independently and had met at various times to review where the gaps are. The validation committee has met more than 5 times to review submissions and populate templates by the 2 subgroups, harmonize submissions, find out where the gaps are, and take measures to fix them. The 3 templates have been completed. 3 major templates have been completed. All stakeholder sensitization workshops have also been held. A second workshop for civil society was being planned just before there was a terror alert by the United States, which changed the course of our preparation. Following up with the covered entities and government agencies on broken links due to creation of new institutions put up by the Petroleum Industry Act implementation. These new institutions have new websites and with new challenges, and we are dealing them. The issue is painstakingly being addressed, all the challenges we mentioned. I've taken this liberty to itemize the various steps we are taking to show precisely that we are not taking this validation lightly at all, that the board has given us all the support, and under the guidance of the board, we think, if not for unseen circumstances, as we highlighted in the letter that we sent to International Secretariat, for which we are still expecting a response. Nigeria was ready and ever ready for the international assessment. But the period of election in our country are usually period of uncertainties because of peculiar nature of our politics in Nigeria and how the politics and institutions interface with each other. So when we live here in Nigeria and we know that elections are not usually a good time for a painstaking and an error-free international assignment like validation. That's why we took those measures. But for that, the board has put all arrangements in place. And I said this on behalf of the chairman, who will also say a few words before you commence presentation. But to be honest, we appreciate this training so much. And that's why all members of the board are here. Some have joined us. Mr. Chairman.
A very good morning to you. Let me join the Executive Secretary and the other members of the board to thank you for putting together this validation exercise. As I also want to underscore what the ES has said regarding the seriousness with which we are taking this validation. I have just gone through the program for today, and the 4 key areas that have been earmarked for capacity development and discussion today, namely the gaps in the outcomes and impact, stakeholder engagement, management of civil society related issues, and transparency issues are very critical to us. Only yesterday, we were discussing the PIA, the role of Neiti in the PIA, our state of readiness, and going forward, knowing fully well that all the standards that EITI prescribed are important for a successful implementation of the PIA. We look forward to this validation. We have requested for a review of the timing, and I share I share in the principles behind the communication by the ES that we shifted away from the election period so as to be sure that this fight for transparency and accountability, we're able to fight it in peace. So I thank you, and we look forward to a robust day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And yes, let me just quickly use this opportunity to also bring to you.
Sorry, Michael, just one. It might be nice to introduce members that are here. And I would like to pass the microphone, Mr. Chairman, so that our international audience will know the board members that are here, those who are just joining us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Ilya Gashibaki. I'm the rep of the Northeast. Thank you.
My name is Alabo Charles here. Charles, I'm representing the Nigerian Mining and Geosciences Society and all its members.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Akogodun Oguche, representing the North Central.
Good morning, all. My name is Dr. Bashir Batura Gavai. I'm from Katsina State. I'm representing Northwest. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Ebule, representing the civil society.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nasir Osman from NNPC.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gabriel Okunjebi Lucy, representing Chairman FIRS.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Oluwatoyin Akinlade, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Mines and Steel Development.
Good morning. My name is Jade Nomumere, and I'm member Shadow Validation Committee. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. Good morning, everyone. My name is Godwin Okpene. I'm a member of the Shadow Validation Committee. Thank you.
Good morning, NSWG members. My name is Mohammed Bubala. I'm a member of the Validation Committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Obiageli Honora. I'm a member of the Validation Committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chineo Kichuku, a member of the Validation Committee.
Good everyone. My name is Chris Ochono. I'm a member of the Validation Committee.
Good morning. My name is Abe George. I'm a member of Validation Shadow Committee.
Good morning, sirs. My name is Asma Odahiru Maybe. I'm a member of the Validation Committee.
Good morning, everyone, board members, and I guess my name is Dieter Bastian, the member of the Shadow Committee, Validation Committee. Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Balar Basad. I'm also a member of the Validation Committee.
Good morning, everyone.
Abdul Mumin Abubakar is my name. I'm a member of the validation committee.
Thank you, everyone. And once again, thank you, Chairman NSWG and the Executive Secretary and distinguished members of the NSWG. It's my pleasure really to be with you today. We always consider this a privilege to have international secretariat interact with leadership of national implementation. Today, we have made some adjustments to the schedule that you have, as I'm just looking at it now. I wanted to quickly call your attention to a few changes. The first presentation will be that on stakeholder engagements, not the one on outcome and impact. Then the second one will be the one on outcome and impact. So there is like a switch between the two. My colleague called Edwin Warden from Oslo. He's based in Oslo. He'll be presenting that. After that, we will take the tools for addressing civil society related issues. My colleague Lydia KOP, who's based in Helsinki, in Finland, will take that. And the last one, sorry, we have now moved out lunch so that we'll close into lunch. The last one by 1:30 will be by Alex Godi, who is right now on mission to Mongolia, but he'll be joining us at that time. We had to make those switches to be able to accommodate my colleagues who are in different time zones and who also have very tight schedules. I'm supposed to finish this very first presentation by 11, but not to worry, we can squeeze everything within the time we have and maybe leave questions or further discussions for some other time, because I'm available here in Nigeria. I can always address those issues. Same goes for the rest of the presentations. If we have very burning issues arising from any one of them and we cannot fit them into the time that we have today, that will be fine as well. By way of background, I want to especially thank the validation committee and also the shadow committee for the great work that they have done on the templates, right? We think that they have done fantastic work on the template. We have been reviewing the templates. Unfortunately, we cannot provide what we call official feedback on the templates, but we can provide advice based on what they have presented, because what they shared with us are the drafts. Okay, so, but I can say now that they have done marvelous work so far. There is plenty of room for improvement in terms of things that can still go in, but I have to commend the work that they have done so far. Yes, the ES mentioned the validation extension request, which is right now being reviewed for board consideration, right? We do not have feedback from the board yet on the validation extension request. So my advice will be that we progress as though the request might not be granted. So as of now, the validation will start on the 1st of January, 2023. So this is the assumption that I want us to work with. So that if the extension comes, good and fine, we can move on in that way. But otherwise, if it doesn't come, validation will kick off on the 1st of January. So what this means is that the validation templates, the fully completed and finalized templates, should be submitted to the International Secretariat on or before 31st of December. So, but just as a background, can I just very quickly say this? I've already highlighted this when I spoke with the senior management team, that there is a way that International Secretariat likes to convey validation. And it is good that we're having this interaction with board members today. It's essential that board members have complete ownership of the validation process. So this is what we usually ensure that we have in place, in which case it is expected that each and every member of the Neiti board should really understand what validation is all about, understand where Nigeria is on each of those requirements, and be also able to answer questions arising from any one of them. So that is why this engagement is essential and very important. If there are areas you don't understand, we are always there to provide further guidance. The technical team of Neiti is also capable, very, very capable to address any issues that you may have, but it is important as individuals and members of the board that you really, really understand every aspect of validation. So that said, let me also highlight that we like to ensure that there is a good understanding of the process of validation. Oftentimes, people view it as an examination. It is not an examination, it's a measure of progress. So what you are implementing is a standard. So at some point, some kind of stock taking would need to happen in terms of the progress you're making in implementing that standard. So I have this joke I came across recently where somebody was asking, what is the essence of an examination, if not for lack of trust? So if you're a teacher and you teach and you ask, do you understand what I have taught? And the student says, yes, sir. So what's the essence of exam, if not because you don't trust that the student understands or understood what you taught? So let's not view it as an exam, because that will make us feel like there is some kind of lack of trust here. No, it is a measure of progress. And by the way, it is a fantastic way for the board to actually take stock of what is going on as far as implementation is concerned in the country. So at the end of each validation, what comes up is a number of corrective actions, right? So there will be a score, yes. You will be scored against all the requirements, and then a total score. And that will now determine, well, whatever you score has implications, right? Just like an examination, but don't look at it as an examination. It is a measure of how you have fared over time, but it helps you because the idea is that as a standard, you are expected. Now, there are 57 countries all implementing this standard. It's not possible that every country will be at the same level of implementation. So there will be some countries where there are breakthroughs that will need to be shared across. And when these are identified, it is through this validation process that we can use that to also improve on the standard itself. So this is really important that we understand this. And by the way, let me say congratulations to us Nigerians, and particularly to Dr. Gashimbaki, if I got that correct. Yeah, Gashimbaki, for the first oil found in Bauchi. Yes, I thought that was a remarkable breakthrough. Yes, so we can now say that it's not just Niger Delta. It is now also Northern Nigeria. But I don't know if we have also thought about what the implications are for the implementation of EITI in Nigeria. Have we thought about that? Because this rests almost completely at your desk, Dr. Gashimbaki. So how do we broaden or expand EITI implementation to the Northeast to ensure that the right disclosures, disclosure levels are maintained, right? And then the key considerations, especially on energy transition, are taken into account. So I just thought I should highlight that. But congratulations to Nigeria. Do you have the pointer? Somebody will change it. No, it's not here. So I don't know how many of us have a copy of this. I brought a complimentary copy for the chairman of the board. This is the Bible of EITI, which is the EITI. Oh, wants to do a photo.
The witness when he was presenting.
So this is like the Bible of the EITI. The validation will not go beyond this standard. And it is also available online. There are soft copies, but I don't know who there's a validation committee of the board, right? Is there? Is there a validation committee of the board? Who is the chair?
The technical committee chairman, NNPC.
Okay, so he gets a copy as well.
Yes.
So the first component that we will take, validation has three components. I'm sure we are all aware of that. Stakeholder engagement component, which looks at requirements 1.1 to 1.5. Then you now have the transparency component, and you have the outcomes and impact component. So I will very quickly run through the stakeholder engagement component before 11 o'clock when my colleagues will step in. So the idea is, can you move this? It's not moving. Okay. So this is a cycle that we should all be familiar with. This is a cycle I think that by now we are all familiar with. This is the cycle of EITI, from establishing objectives, which is what you do when you're carrying out, putting the work plan together, up onto reviewing the disclosures. What sort of disclosures are we having, and what are we expecting? What should we be looking out for? And then you disclose the data. So here is the technical stuff that the IAs do between the 2 and 3. Then you disclose the data, and you also oversee the disclosures, and then analysis of the data, this communication of the data, dissemination of the data, and then review of outcomes and impact, and you start all over again. So the argument we always make is that if you maintain this cycle, by the time validation comes, you really have little or nothing to do, because this is exactly what validation looks at. How have you done all this and completing this cycle? Move this slide. So we have looked at the templates submitted by the technical team or the validation committee. So this particular exercise we are doing this morning, we look at exactly what is on ground, because validation itself looks at, first of all, what you have completed in the templates, but there's another component that says we have to engage with stakeholders in country and get their perception and get their responses on those areas. So that hasn't happened, so you don't have to, whether you haven't taken that into account. But I have a question to ask. The key objective of requirement 1.1 is to ensure a full, active, and effective government lead for EITI implementation, both in terms of high-level political leadership and operational engagement, as a means of facilitating all aspects of EITI implementation. So it's talking about how committed has government been towards EITI implementation in Nigeria. My question is, does Neiti and all stakeholders, those of us who are here now, consider the objectives of EITI 1.1 to have been fulfilled? Yes. That's an emphatic yes from the ears. Does anyone support that? Yes. It's not unanimous. Yes. I expected to hear a bigger yes. Okay. So if we are confident about that, these are the things that we looked at. Attendance or input at MSG meetings of the government representatives. So we have about 5 or 6 government representatives on the board, which also includes the chairman of the board because he was appointed by government. And there's also the executive secretary. So what we have seen so far, the evidence is strong in terms of attendance, but it's not just attendance that is looked at. We also look at the input from government representatives during discussions. So we haven't looked at that because we need to go into the minutes. So validation will go into the minutes, all the minutes of MSG meetings, just looking out for contributions from the government representatives. So this is why this exercise is very important, validation, because it tells you that even you attending the meeting and the things you say at the meetings also are very important. So it helps you to know how you can redesign your engagement and be sure that you're fulfilling what is essential. So if the minutes reveal that, just as we have looked at the attendance, and thanks to the validation committee, the attendance is strong, although I think we have some government reps who have missed 1 or 2 meetings. That will be noted. during validation. It's not very strong, but it's also noted. You will see a comment there saying there are people, because the meetings of the MSG happen like 4 times in a year, right? 4 or 5 times in a year. Okay, and the consideration will be made about why did these people not attend the meeting? Was it that the meetings were not properly scheduled? So which will give an indication of, is there proper governance structure in place and all that? So just let's be mindful of that just by not attending meetings, it reflects again on how validation works out. So the second is submission of data for EITI reporting. This is quite strong. All the agencies covered by the report, EITI reporting, submitted data for EITI reporting. So there is no gap there. So addressing legal barriers to disclosure. So what has government done all this while within the periods? By the way, this validation will be looking at the period 2019 to 2022. That's if we are to start by 1st of January next year. So I think that Nigerian government has done quite significant progress, made significant progress in addressing disclosure barriers. The PIA has provisions for beneficial ownership reporting. The PIA has provisions for contract transparency reporting. So these are some of the evidence we can use to support this. The amended CAMA also provides for beneficial ownership. So I think this is also strong. Then funding. Within this period that we are looking at under review, I think that government has also demonstrated commitment through funding of EITI implementation. About 75 to 80% of native budget is provided for by government. And I'm not talking about just one. This has been consistent from 2019 up till now. And also, there is also an additional evidence we can add there, the provision of funding for the procurement of a new office. This is a fantastic thing that needs to be emphasized. This should be a headline, in my own opinion, because apart from helping us to fulfill this 1.1, that can also help us, because you will hear that much later during the presentations. There is a provision for extra points for effectiveness and sustainability. So that can be considered under sustainability, because when you have a permanent office, this is a clear message that you're passing across in terms of sustainability of EITI implementation in Nigeria. So outreach to wider constituency. This is where I have seen some kind of considerable gap, because what it talks about is we have about five or six government representatives or 6 government representatives on the board. So what framework do we have in place for these government reps to reach out to the wider government constituency? So there has to be a process, there has to be a clear framework. We used to have the IMTT playing this key role, but I'm not sure where we are at with IMTT functioning, and also the IATT. So that needs to be looked into before validation and kind of revived. But if you have evidence that EITI issues are also discussed at high-level government meetings like FEC, that can also go in here as way of giving feedback. And what we're talking about is not just feedback, there has to be a way of input as well. So all the representatives, like I think FIRS is here, how do you bring back, how do you convey the messages or decisions taken at MSG meetings to government agencies? And how do you now get input from government agencies? That has to be, there has to be a clear framework for that. So use of EITI data to promote public debate, I think this is strong. I also found some evidence that the validation team included in the template about RMFC using Neiti data for revenue recovery. So we need more evidence of that nature to populate that.
Yeah,
Next, yes, please.
Do you want us to proceed? Do we just listen, or do we at any point discuss some of the issues?
Yeah, I will suggest that because of time, I run through them, and if we have time, we can take the questions now. Okay, but exactly at 11, I'll have to hand over to my colleague for the next presentation. Next slide. Okay, so this is company engagement. Again, the objective is to ensure that extractive companies are fully, actively, and effectively engaged in EITI. And my question here will also be, do we think this objective have been fulfilled? Do we think the objective has been fulfilled? There's no answer. I don't think there's any company rep here right now. Is there a company representative apart from NNPC? Do we have a company representative here? Because I think that there are gaps here and they need to take note of these gaps. Attendance has been strong, although one of the company reps did not attend 2 out of 7 meetings. He only attended 5 of them. So it has to be reviewed in terms of what prevented this individual to not attend up to 2 meetings. Submission of data, I think this is strong. However, 4 of oil and gas and 6 mining companies did not submit data for the 2020 reports. So now, when gaps like this are identified, it has happened, but the key thing will be, what was the follow-up? Was there any kind of consequence for them not submitting this data? Has Neiti taken any step to address why they did not submit data? So outreach to wider constituency, use of company forum, which by the way is really key. This is something exceptional that Nigeria put in place in 2016. And we are quite proud that we have that. It does not exist in a number of other countries, but is an excellent platform for companies to engage EITI implementation. But we need to check how well that has also functioned in the past 3 years. We noted that there have been companies meetings with Neiti. There is more evidence required here. Use of EITI data, NNPC and OPTS statements, we have noted those ones, but there is more evidence required of companies by themselves reaching out or using EITI data or promoting the use of EITI data. These are the sort of things that the board should be addressing. Next slide. So I will not say a lot here because the third presentation will be focused mainly on civil society. And Peter, you have to be, I was thinking that maybe more than yourself in terms of civil society, but I also consider that the representatives of the zones are part of civil society as well. So, but that presentation will be very key to civil society engagement around validation. So the objective here, again, is about the engagement of civil society in the EITI process, and if there is an enabling environment for that to happen. So attendance is fine. Outreach to wider constituency, really, really excellent. Civil society organizations have been doing a lot in terms of outreach. Use of EITI data, very strong. The civil society protocol. Here is a lot of consultations that will happen around validation. This is where you get that from. So these are not the sort of things that you can respond to using the templates, because there will be consultations that will happen around this time. But let us note that the question here is, have individuals or groups engaging in public debate, expressing opinions, or seeking and imparting information on issues, have they been subject to threats and attacks, such as legal proceedings, intimidation, and all that? We did not see any evidence on the templates submitted. However, we know that we have had these sort of issues, and it is important for the board to reach out and preempt those sort of issues that happened. You have to find a way. This is the responsibility for Peter to say, we had this number of complaints within these 3 years, and these were the strategies we used to address them. So nobody can say you can't have complaints, or you can't have threats, or you can't have these issues. What is key is, how did the board address them when they arose? Then the validation also takes into account the overall environment for civil society. It does not affect a lot of the assessment that will be made during validation, but it looks at generally what is the environment like, because you cannot actually say the environment for civil society engaging in EITI is excellent. Meanwhile, the entire environment for civil society is repressed, just like we have it right now. Overall environment, Civicus rating is one of the international ratings for civil society environment in the world that is also considered during validation. And right now, Civicus rating for Nigeria says it is repressed, which is not good news. Okay, so the next is requirement 1.4 on MSG governance and functioning. Objective is there an independent MSG that can exercise active, meaningful overall oversight? I think this area is also strong representation. The Neiti Act takes care of a lot of what happens here in terms of MSG governance. So because the Neiti Act talks about how representatives are nominated. However, I need to highlight this for government, maybe not an issue, but for companies and for civil society, they need to also have their internal systems clear, right, and documented. So the internal system sort of ratifies what government does through the Neiti Act. So the government appoints, right, but the ratification happens within the constituencies. And there has to be like a clear document that describes how that ratification happens. Capacity of MSG is strong, breach of EITI code of conduct. So here, stakeholder views will also be relied upon. So it is important that the board does like an internal check. Has there been any allegations of breach of the code of EITI code of conduct? I'm sure we are all aware of the EITI code of conduct. It's also available online. It's important that we are all conversant with it. So if there are any allegation of any kind out there, because the way validation happens is that there will be a call for views that will be sent to almost everybody in the world, including within Nigeria here. So you don't have control in terms of what sort of feedback can come through that process. But it is important that there are no surprises, that you reach out within yourselves and say, what are the likely sort of complaints that can be, that can emanate from this sort of call, and try to have some explanations in place for them. So MSG TO, decision-making process is strong. MSG TO is strong, though I understand that the board charter is currently under review. Has that been completed? Review of the board charter, has that been completed, approved, and confirmed? No, yeah, okay. So that needs to be tidied up quickly, because the information we have is that the board charter is under review by the board itself. Next slide. Okay, work plan. This is an important instrument for EITI implementation, and the validation takes this very seriously, and it's about to ensure that the annual planning supports the implementation of national priorities. So national priorities, and also is also an outcome of consultations. So the validation, we check if the work plan was just a process that someone sat on their desk, completed everything, and published it as the annual plan. It has to involve, first of all, the board members, and also the next level, the constituencies that you are representing. So I expect that there will be evidence that Dr. Gashimbaki, for instance, took the draft work plan back to the Northeast and had like a town hall meeting where he presented the work plan to a cross-section of members of that geographical zone. And they looked at all the items and they said, yes, this is what we want. And then you bring it back. Was this what happened, Dr. Gashimbaki? No, I'm talking about for the 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022 work plans. If you're saying it will happen, this is, yeah, okay. July 2021.
So much model example is Northwest.
Okay.
The touch with the political hierarchy.
Okay.
As well as the traditional hierarchy, as well as the
okay.
society.
And this was done for the 2022 work plan, was it?
The 2022 work plan is still work in progress.
No, we have an approved. Isn't 2023 is what is in process. 2022 is, yes. You inherited 2022. Okay. Okay. Well, so this is the 3, okay. Yes, the one you are implementing now, you did not inherit it. It must have been completed about third or fourth quarter of last year, and you were in place by that time. So, but this is exactly the process that should happen. And it's not just it happening in that way, it has to be documented. So this is the sort of evidence that validation looks out for in trying to consider this particular. If there is any indication that those sort of wider consultations did not happen, it will be a red flag, right? So please, let's note that stakeholder consultations is the work plan measurable and time-bound, costing and funding sources. By the way, Nigeria's work plan is usually used as a sample for other countries. So this is some kind of, I hope I'm not giving out an expo, but it's something that we need to maintain and also continue to improve on. But the consultation part of it is really key, and we should take that into account. Then progress on implementation and that. So EITI validation procedure, we can leave that till the end because we have just a few minutes now for questions. We can take those questions, but this just talks about how the validation progresses from start to finish, which we can take if we have time at the end. Yes, are there any questions, especially from the validation committee? Because I expect that you will also go back to those templates and look at the areas where we need a bit more information on. I can say that as far as the stakeholder engagement component is concerned, yes, there are gaps, but these are things that can really be worked on in the time that we still have. So thank you very much, and I can take questions now.
Can you give us one or two examples from countries around how far they have gone with all this? They are very important. But how have other countries gone through, especially countries with the same on the same level with Nigeria?
Okay, so yes, Liberia.
This question,
okay.
bearing in mind general understanding the attitude from the common man who is a major stakeholder to the political principle on the issue of transparency. Different levels of understanding. And it goes to the root of funding.
Okay.
Because some of these activities require resources to carry out, like the town hall. How have other countries gone through?
Okay.
So that we can improve.
Yeah.
Just want to have experience sharing.
Absolutely. In the area of consultations that you just mentioned, maybe we can just address that aspect quickly. During COVID, of course, there were restrictions and challenges in terms of how much consultations you can have and how widely you can have them. But countries were able to navigate those sort of challenges. We started witnessing that more and more countries were using technology, sending emails out where they are possible, right? And we could, like in the area of dissemination, when you come to outcomes and impacts, you see that validation asks you how much have you carried out dissemination, and people will come out and say, oh, there was COVID, so we couldn't go out to do road shows like we used to do them. But they started using radio, they started using television, and all that. So there are ways of working around those challenges. That's number one. Number two is also important because validation or EITI will not punish you, right? When there are clear barriers, like funding that you mentioned, but they need to be identified and documented that we face this kind of challenge. And that's why we could not achieve this. We planned to this point, but this was the challenge, and then we could not achieve it. So it's all about how much are you able to, work towards identifying those barriers, and then work towards addressing the barriers. Because the next thing is, so what are you doing to address this barrier? Because it's all about progress. So if you identify that barrier, are you doing something about it? And then when do we now expect that you would have solved that problem? In a number of countries have gone through validation, especially under this new model. Liberia went through validation. They scored about 80-something points. Sierra Leone also scored quite high within our own region. And they also had ways of explaining why they couldn't achieve all that. Yes, in the case of Nigeria, yes, you can always say that the expectations are usually high. Yeah, but we have also in the past been able to meet those expectations. In our own region, we haven't got any other country that achieved satisfactory progress. So this validation we'll be looking at, have you gone backwards or have you gone forward? Because we achieved the highest possible rating available as at that time. So there's a new validation model, right? And the expectation is that, that high level performance will be sustained. Okay. Yes. Okay.
I asked that question just to understand the fact that we're supposed to learn from other countries and to underscore the fact that there is a changing environment. Like we planned, this is just an explanation. Like we planned to hold our meetings in different geopolitical zones. It is part of the outreach strategy. But funding has hindered part of it. And on top of that, security and safety issues have completely become obstacles to such enterprise. But we have noted that your suggestion on use of technology and other things, and we're taking it on board. That is being used anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. My comments is a follow-up on the chairman's comments as well. I was expecting, but I don't know whether I'm preempting this meeting, but I was expecting that this board, this is the first validation that we are going to do. And typically I was expecting the experience sharing more or less, not from other countries, but from the past validations. What were the failings? What were the successes? So that we know clearly the pitfalls to avoid in this upcoming validation. And if we have succeeded in areas A, B, C, D, we should not reverse progress, which means we can only build on the successes that we have achieved thus far. So that's one part that I don't know whether this question is supposed to be answered by ourselves or by you or by the validation committee. That's one part. The other part is, it is important. I liked your opening statement. You said that the validation will take full. So meaning we need to know clearly as members of the NSWG, what are the specific things that we need to do? Clearly, A, B, C, D. And if that is tied to the civil society, to the geopolitical zones, reps, whatever it is in terms of activity, actions to be taken to make sure that that is in place, we need to know. You mentioned something that I don't know whether so far our minutes of meetings have taken that into consideration. you said you will even look at contribution by members. So again, that is something that at the beginning, when we were inaugurated, nobody told us that that would be a requirement, because that would have been something that especially the government reps should be very conscious of it so that it will be captured. So I think those are my few comments. And then finally, now that I thought about it, and it's very good that you mentioned, there is a need for a robust engagement on the Northeast regarding this discovery, so that we avoid the past pitfalls of what has happened in the Niger Delta. And the earlier we start, the better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's a number of issues to respond to there. Very quickly, the first one is, yes, maybe, we had planned an elaborate mission, and there was supposed to be secretariat visiting exactly at this time. So if we had more time, we would have started this presentation with what was achieved during the last validation. So it's not an omission, it was also prepared. But it was when the time for this particular engagement was reduced to just this 1 hour for this particular component, for instance, we said, why don't we just go straight into what are the issues we need to know now, and then the gaps. Because of course, like I mentioned earlier, Nigeria attained the highest possible level at that time. So what that means is that for very many of those requirements, Nigeria fulfilled them. Okay, so you're starting from the point of, yes, you need to know how we fulfill them, because what you're checking now is, I hope we have not done any kind of backsliding. So that will be done, right? That will be done if we still have the time. And if eventually the validation extension response from the board becomes is positive. I also assumed that in the presentations done by the technical team to the board, that they had done that analysis. But that's by the way. Now you're telling me it hasn't been done, but we have that ready, which is to run through where exactly that we were at as at 2019 when the last validation was concluded. On the second point, yes, by the end of today, you will get a lot of what will the board be doing. So I have seen you taking notes, but within this first component, like I said, there are just not a lot for you to chase. You can see that we highlighted them there, and most of them are things that the technical committee can chase and get documentation and fill them up. We will get to the outcomes and impact right now. And there is also the civil society presentation. But then the transparency one is an area where I think that you take a lot of copious notes, right? Number one, it has a lot of requirements there. And then number two, there are technical and knotty issues. And I'm happy that NNPC is here because it's about the disclosures. So these are the areas that we expect that there will be some kind of responsibilities for even board members to say, please, you take on this and make sure that this is done. NNPC, you take on this and make sure that it is done. So at the end of the day, if that is not still clear, I can still come in to point out exactly those areas. Okay. So my colleague, Edwin Warden, has joined us, and he will be taking the next presentation, which is on outcomes and impact. Edwin, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Mike, I'm here. Can you hear me very well?
Yes, we can hear you, but maybe can it be louder? Do I need to join?
How is it now? How is the sound now?
Yes, fantastic, Edwin. Thank you very much. So we've just gone through the stakeholder engagement component. In the next 1 hour, if you can just do your presentation within 35 to 40 minutes, and we can use the rest of the time to have a quick interaction. I'll hand over to you now, Edwin. Thank you very much.
Michael, you need to also give us the background of the speaker.
Okay, so Edwin Warden is the EITI Anglophone officer that works with the Anglophone Africa team, together with our regional director, Gilbert. We look after the countries within the region. So he is based in Oslo. Well, Edwin is also our brother. He's from Ghana. And if maybe Edwin, you can use a minute or two and say a few more about your background, and then you go into the presentation. Thank you very much, Edwin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mike, once again, and thanks very much to the MSG for this opportunity for us, the International Secretariat, to join you for your discussions around how can we prepare really well for the upcoming validation. It's really an honor to join all of you, and I've met very, very few of the MSG members, not the least the Neiti boss and a few of the colleagues here. Exciting times are around the corner. Nigeria's validation the last time was extremely successful, and I think I speak for basically everyone within the EITI that we cannot wait to have the best results for Nigeria. As much as it pains me as a Ghanaian to say that, I think I can say that Nigeria having the best score would be in the interest of everyone within the EITI. So we're more than happy to provide this support. In terms of my background, I'm a political scientist with a lot of focus the last years on international development and peace and conflict work. And since 2014, working a lot around the extractive sector governance issues. So I joined the EITI back in 2016, and that's where I engaged a lot with Dr. Oji and the past administration at Neiti. Since then, it's been on and off, and I've been mostly focused on the Anglophone Africa team since the last 2-3 years now. So looking forward to discussing a bit with you around what is looked at when we talk about outcomes and impact under the new validation model, and most importantly, what has Neiti done, at least from our point of view so far, what is left to be done. Can I proceed? I'm trying to share my screen, but I'm not made the host, so I'm not sure if my screen can be seen. Okay, I think I can share my screen now. Yeah. Can you confirm if you can see my screen now?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. So what we essentially did, similar to what Dr. Mike did, was to review your draft 0 and your APR to see very preliminary. So I think I used the word preliminary. So please take everything we discussed here very carefully, so that this a lot of work might still be needed to be done, and the ultimate decision definitely rests on the EITI board. But this is where we think matter stands now as we get into next year. So the key message that I want to leave here with is this very known statement: what can be measured can be managed. So a lot of the conversations that we're having here today is around how can we document issues that are happening, progress that is being made, outcomes that are being achieved. And once we are able to measure those accurately and document them very clearly, then we know exactly how, as a team, Neiti can take those actions forward. So aside the validation, it's really important to note how much useful this whole exercise we are undergoing would be useful for the MSG in the years before and after validation. There are a couple of requirements that are useful for outcomes and impacts. And the first one actually has to do with the work plan, but Dr. Mike has spoken a bit around the work plan. So I would focus mostly on requirement 7 onwards. The first one has to do with public debate. And here, the main crux of the issue is trying to understand whether there's evidence-based debate within the extractive industry in terms of governance, and whether that has been achieved through active communication of relevant aspects of the EITI to data to key stakeholders in and out of the MSG in ways that are really accessible and reflect what stakeholders actually need. So different stakeholders have different needs. A couple of components, if you dig deep into that requirement, that are really highlighted. The first one is EITI disclosures, or are EITI disclosures comprehensible? And here, what is basically looking at is whether EITI summary reports are provided in ways that will make it easier for people to be able to understand what is in the reports. The idea is to not just develop a 500-page report, which people might not be able to review and understand, but actually have 2-3 page summary reports, whether disclosed on your EITI website or in summary report that can be handed over to different stakeholders based on their need. Some of these things being done. And we're glad to say that we've seen a positive trend here. Neiti has done tremendous work when it comes to demonstrating or developing summary reports, whether through briefs or so on and so forth. The other is whether EITI report has been actively promoted. And here, what we've also seen is that there's been a lot of work that Neiti has done in promoting your report. So many of you have mentioned today that you've engaged in a lot of community activities before COVID. And Dr. Mike has also mentioned throughout the COVID, what has been some of the innovative ways. So when I reviewed your APRs, I did see references to some radio events and in-person event that had been launched. So I guess the point here is being able to document a lot of these dissemination activities you've undertaken since the last validation and more concretely up to now. The other point here is whether the reports are accessible to diverse range of stakeholders. And again, we've seen a very positive trend here. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of community engagement in different areas. But the key question here is around the issue of inclusion, whether diverse groups, so different genders have been considered, whether different communities have been considered, looking at particularly marginalized communities or oil-bearing, mineral-bearing communities, first-line communities, whether those have been considered. And then the issue of accessibility, which is key here. So, for example, when we go to different regions or different communities, have we managed to translate the document into languages that will make it easily accessible to them? In some countries, we've seen that they've gone to the point of translating to different languages, but also even to different formats where blind people can be able to read the EITI summary reports. So these are extents of measures that can be taken to really document the work that you've done on ensuring inclusion and accessibility in EITI report dissemination. And again, the overall goal is making sure that the public is really engaged in terms of debate and no one is left behind in this process. The final bit here has to do with whether disclosures have actually contributed to public debate. And here there's not much to be said than the amazing work that Neiti has done over the last few years. I think what can be done is documenting some of this. And I saw in your APR that you had a lot of, your outcomes and impact template, the portions you filled up, that you had a lot of news items on where EITI disclosures by Neiti had led to public debate in the news, on radio stations, and so on and so forth. So again, amazing work and congratulations. Documenting more of this would be useful. The next one, and please feel free to pause at any time to ask any question. And let me just do a quick check whether I'm still very audible and if there's any quick question before I move on.
Yes, the audio is fine.
Great. So the next one has to do with data accessibility. And again, it piggybacks to the previous slide. All these are very much interconnected. The point here is first to see whether the MSG has an open data policy. And yes, this is clearly demonstrated in a lot of your disclosures. I haven't had a close look, but I guess the question I'm having is whether the open data policy has been updated in recent years to reflect the EITI's direction towards systematic disclosure. If this has been done, then fair enough. If it hasn't, then the encouragement here would be to refine your open data policy to make sure it meets recent disclosures. I understand that there's a lot of work being done currently to review part of your MSG's documents to reflect the EITI changing requirements. And I think this would be one of the areas to focus on, the open data policy, refining that and making sure that it's up to date. The other bit is on the government and company open data policy and practices. Now, I put partial here for one reason, because in practice, we do know that in Nigeria, a lot of government entities are in practice disclosing information in open data. So whether in Excel or other formats, that makes it possible to be reused by the public, to download the documents and reuse them, not just PDFs. But the question here is the policy. So have we seen government entities having policies disclosed on their website in terms of their openness policies? If so, then it will be useful to document those and replicate the same for companies as well. This question next is quite a tricky one. Here, there's a lot of increasing emphasis on whether the underlying data for EITI disclosures are made available in machine-readable open data formats. All this means, in essence, is basically if you look at EITI reports, there's a lot of analysis on subnational revenues, those that were expected, those that were paid. There's a lot of analysis around financial disclosures. There's a lot of analysis around the reconciliation. All of these are built on some analysis done by the IA in an Excel file, but the final product will be provided in the EITI report. I think we've heard from many stakeholders around the world that this core information will be needed so that analysis can be done. So what the validation process has sought to do is to make sure that MSGs request that data from the IA or that underlying data for every analysis that had been done in the EITI report to be provided to the MSG, and that this data most possibly should be published on your website to accompany the report. So you would have the report in PDF, and you do a very good job in adding the Word file, but then you would also have all the Excel file for the various data points that have been analyzed in the report. And then there will be the summary data that would also be submitted. And I think with these three sort of doyen of data, you do have very good chances that stakeholders can assess data and make use of this data. So that is the essence of this point, and I hope that this can be taken on board. We've seen that many countries manage to collect this data and publish it relatively soon before the validation kicked off. The next one here is on summary data templates, and I know that I've done a lot of work previously with some of the Neiti colleagues, and I know that you are working to complete the 2020 summary data. So just to encourage that, this is one of the areas that needs to be completed ahead of validation. If you'd see where I've included italicized, these are areas that are not required, but encouraged. So not working on this would not affect your validation score, but working on it would improve your validation score. That determines the difference between whether you get a fully met, which is 90, or exceeded, which is 100. If you manage to also address the encouraged aspects of the requirements, then you have met not just ticking the box, as we call it, as I said, the technical bits, but you've also addressed the encouraged part, which together can help to achieve the overall objective of that particular requirement. Here, the question is whether MSGs have systematically disclosed some data in machine-readable format and made them also quite interoperable. Again, I put partial here because I'm aware Neiti have disclosed a lot of bio data in open data formats. I'm not sure of all the other disclosures, but what the point here is that we may need to document a bit more around the various requirements where Neiti by yourselves have made your data systematically available in open formats so that it can speak to other data sets within the country and outside your borders as well. I'll move very quickly to the next one, which is around recommendations from EIT implementation. Here, as you see very clearly, I think the response is outstanding. If you ask me personally, again, don't take my word for it until the validation report comes out next year, but I think this is definitely one of the areas I believe Nigeria should score the highest. You've done an amazing piece of work over the last years. You've been a leader when it comes to following up on recommendations from EITI implementation, but has that been sustained over time, especially since the last validation? That's the question. So when I read through your assessments, your APRs, and I read through your outcomes and impacts template as you filled up, I've seen a lot of positive trends. Your remedial issues, how you've addressed it, responding to recommendations. I've seen a lot of work around the REM track, setting up interagency coordinating units to address issues from validations and issues from EITI reporting. And now we've also seen very positive trends with work you've done on your policy briefs. The question is, have we been doing a lot more of this since the last few years to make sure that, you know, the positive trend that has been started since Neiti commenced cannot be cannot retrogress. And here I trust that you have a huge communication aspect in the person of Dr. Oji leading the secretariat. So I can imagine that definitely we should not be worried in this space. The final one that I want to share is on outcomes and impacts of EITI implementation broadly in the country. And the objective here is whether there is regular monitoring and evaluation of implementation, including evaluation of whether EITI had actually delivered on the objectives with a view of ensuring EITI's own public accountability. So quite internal looking, but the work is quite external looking. Here, do you have an APR? Basically, the first question, not to go through it too much, but is there an APR or has there been a documentation of outcomes and impacts on different thematic areas? The question is yes. There's several positive examples of policy briefs on specific issues that document progress, but also you have a solid APR, which again, like Dr. Mike said, this is one of the best we've seen in the region. You do specify your strategic objective for a period of years. You monitor implementation success over a period of time. And I've not seen many countries doing that. So again, kudos to a lot of the work that you've done. A key point here, again, is coming back to the inclusivity bit of your of outcomes and impact review. And it speaks to the wider consultations that Dr. Mike also mentioned. This is a very key part of the new validation model, that beyond the MSG, have we engaged actors? Have we engaged donors? Have we engaged communities? Have we engaged that small SOE in Kaduna or Port Harcourt to make sure that we pick up the different views of how EITI has impacted their work in terms of outcomes and impacts? And have we imbibed them in the documentation that Neiti will provide ahead of validation? I've seen a lot of work that you've done with anti-corruption actors, for example, in your APR, and the encouragement here is let's engage small stakeholders. Let's bring those back to document how EITI is achieving impact and outcomes within the context of Nigeria. A new introduction to the EITI validation this year, or since 2019, has been what we call the effectiveness and sustainability indicators. Again, this came to board because there was this idea that when countries go beyond and above to do some great job, they are not rewarded. So the EITI introduced this to reward extra points for 5 specific areas where we know that when progress is made there, it really improves natural resource governance in the country. These areas are particularly around whether EITI has met, EITI implementation addresses national relevance to extractive sector governance. And here, your work plan is key on whether you use your work plan to address national relevance of natural resource governance. Again, your work, the disclosures in your EITI report will be key here, whether they meet issues around subsidies in the country, whether legal reforms. You've done a lot of work here, so documenting this will be very relevant. How has Neiti contributed to that? This is around systematic disclosure more broadly. So again, a lot of your work you've done on systematically disclosing bioinformation can be documented here. Is there an enabling environment for civic participation? Again, being able to demonstrate any work you've done to foster a good environment for civic participation within the EITI process will be key if we can get some extra points here. The last bit is whether EITI sector data is accessible and has been used for research and analysis by other organizations or individuals. And the final bit is whether EIT has informed changes in extractive sector policies and practices. Here, the work that Neiti has done over the last 10, 15, 20 years to get the Petroleum Industry Act passed can be quite documented here to get some extra points here. To answer these questions, there are specific questions on each of them, and I'm not going to go through, but you see that for each of them, there are specific questions, and you can look at the validation guide to see those specific questions and document where you've been able to address those particular issues. And like I mentioned, you have your work plan to demonstrate it, you have your APRs to demonstrate it, and you have the different templates to showcase with the evidence where you have met this. We've seen many countries scoring extra 1, 2, 3 points because of the documentation they've done here. And that could be the difference between whether you end up with a high score or very high score or a moderate score. It could be. I'm concluding by saying documentation is key. Documentation will be king and it will be queen in terms of the work that will be done in the validation. The better the documentation, the more likely the assessment will be favorable for the country. Let me just show some few examples of how countries have documented a bit of their work. On gender mainstreaming, which is a key part of the inclusion issue that I mentioned, this is an example we've seen from Philippines, where they did a bit of work on understanding the impact of mining on gender. And they demonstrated that very clearly in their outcomes and impact templates in their last validation. That scored them very good scores here. In the UK, this is how they reflected the work that the work plan had done and its objective for the National Secretariats and the MSG, and how it reflects with UK's broader government priorities. And they did that very clearly here. And I just wanted to share this as an example for you on how to demonstrate this. Finally, on how to engage wider stakeholders and make sure that there is public accessibility of data. I think Dr. Steve mentioned this, Dr. Mike, sorry, mentioned this. In the period of COVID, when governments could not engage with citizens as much, Slaty instituted what they call the Slaty TV Hour, which they had about 6, 7 series over a period of time where they engaged people, they got people calling in, they described part of EITI disclosures to them, and use that as a platform of leveraging technology to actually engage citizens in a very difficult time. If you look at Malawi, what they've also done was to summarize a lot of their reports into smaller versions. And like I said, they also did sort of versions of that report in format that could be readable by even blind people. Again, they managed to demonstrate here the different community disseminations they've done, going into details on, for example, who were those that attended, how many women versus men attended, and how has that increased over time, attached the reports from those events to be able to demonstrate part of their impact. I'll leave it at this and open up if there are any questions. Thanks very much for engaging.
Thank you very much. Edwin, you can hear the applause. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and then taking us through the key parts of the outcomes and impact component of validation. I am certain that there will be some areas for clarification, questions, or comments that we can take in the next 10 to 15 minutes left before we go for tea break.
Thank you. This year's presentation reminds me that in 2011, Nigeria attained compliance status, which is now 11 years. And I have attended the occasion at Paris in France. It was the time when I was conducting my PhD program in UK. As a result of that achievement Nigeria attained, I remodeled the title of my research work, which I intended to conduct the research on how the extractive industries in Nigeria manage their resources revenue. But with the development of which I observed specifically with regard to the insufficient data from the solid mineral resources, I limited my research to the oil and gas industry, which revealed that Nigeria provides insufficient disclosure, that is partial disclosure of oil and gas industry's activities in terms of payment of signature bonuses, royalties, and contract transparency, etc. Now that with this recent development, 11 years after that, Neiti has a record in public domain that reveal the present status of Nigerians' compliance, please. If it is so, it has, please. We need it to be shared so that we'll update our information and knowledge. Thank you.
Can you please help me clarify the question, Mike?
I got him correctly. The straight answer to his question will be that there is the latest validation report provides information on the latest status of Nigeria's implementation of the EITI. I think that's the answer, because the record is there, the report is online. You can also access it on the EITI website. That's the one we mentioned earlier, that Nigeria attained satisfactory progress. It is no longer expressed in that form now because there is a new validation model in place. So I think that answers your question. And it's an interesting thing that someone like yourself already went through that rigorous process of researching Nigeria's implementation of EITI and also management of resources. You're from the FIRS, right? Oh, you're representing Northwest geopolitical region. So Edwin, he was seeking for information on Nigeria's current status as far as implementation of EITI is concerned. So I've addressed that. Let's take another question.
I was saying that when he was a student in Scotland, he joined us during the global conference in Paris, and he was a student then, so he's now a board member. He was a student, so he came as a student to Paris conference in 2011. At that time, he was a research student, but he's now an NSWG member. Congratulations. Well, I think this is a very, the template on outcomes and impact is a very difficult one for us in a matter that we have achieved so much, but attribution of impact in the EITI is still a matter of, it's a challenge. How do you measure, how do you attribute an impact? Outcome we can understand, but impact, how do you claim an impact in such a way that no other agency can claim, can contradict your effort? Is a problem for the EITI globally. Yeah. And I would like to know if this has been simplified, and if that has been simplified, how will this apply in terms of assessment during the EITI, then during the validation. Then the other question is on the area of definition of outcome in this particular context. In this particular context, what constitutes specific outcome? What constitutes specific impact? So how do we build the nexus between the two in a manner that is clear and visible? Thank you.
Okay, so Edwin, I'll address a little bit and then you can come in. I think in terms of, I completely agree with you, Dr. Roji, because it's in development generally, measuring impact is usually where the challenges, the most challenges lie. But I think that what the templates the validation templates attempt to do is to simplify that process for you. So if you look at the template asks specific questions that you're just required to answer and then provide evidence for whatever answer that you give. I can give you a typical example. About a couple of years ago, Neiti carried out or produced a policy brief, which documented how much Nigeria lost by not reviewing the PSC. Made that financial modeling and, made it clear, providing facts and figures, supporting why Nigeria should review those agreements. And in the end, that also led to the Deep Offshore Act being amended. And the records were all there. So if you go into the outcomes and impact template and you're able to document and say, we did this, an activity. We carried out an activity. Yes, and it led to this outcome. The next level of it is outcome. And this outcome has created an impact because by reviewing that act, Nigeria is now able to make more money. So that's documented in that sequence at the level of validation will be captured absolutely and in a very good way. So that's just one typical example that I can use to illustrate that, how Neiti can say, this is the activity we carried out, and this activity led to this particular outcome, and this outcome has led to this impact. And you would have fulfilled that particular section or that particular part of the requirement. Edwin, do you have something to add there?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mike. Very, very quickly, and I mean, I totally agree with you, and I guess everyone sitting around the table would admit the challenge of talking about resource chain and monitoring and evaluation. And I think EITI appreciates that very clearly. So one way of dealing with that, just like many other difficult EITI questions, is to give it back to the MSG. So because of national ownership, the core definition of what is an activity up to the last change of what is an outcome, impact, rests on the MSG on defining those and following up those. So for example, if the MSG thinks that publishing a report, for example, in itself is an impact, for example, in itself, for example, then being able to document the activity to publishing the report, and we all know publishing a report is often an output. It's a direct result of an activity. So you might have to do something to get an outcome out of that output. And then, as Dr. Mike said, engage further to get the final impact, which is usually what we call the big picture indicator. So whether it's revenue mobilization or democratization or openness generally, or addressing corruption. So the MSG basically can define what it is that they want to achieve at different levels of the resource chain. And as much as they're able to document that, the assessment will capture what the MSG sought to achieve versus what they've done as clearly as that. But to answer that question on attribution and how to do that, I think Dr. Mike has given a solid example. And I also want to give one that we've seen in Ghana. And the answer here is about robustness of the methodology. So we've seen Gates commissioned a report where they basically got a consultant to look at what has been the revenue impact of Gates since its implementation. And what the consultant did was to pick a couple of recommendations that had been implemented that could directly be attributed to Gates. So out of 100 recommendations, they landed, let's say 100, it wasn't 100, but they landed with just 2 to 3 recommendations that could directly be attributed to Gates. And its implementation, they tracked and they realized that it had led to substantial amount of revenues increase in the case of Ghana. And they did the whole sort of robustness check along the monitoring framework to then conclude that we can say that Gates' implementation over the last year has contributed to this amount of revenue. That was an activity implementing Gates that led to an outcome or an impact, depending on how you see it, which was revenue mobilization. So I think these are some examples that we can look at in terms of what constitutes an outcome, and how do you strengthen the robustness of that attribution between the resource chain? And then the final point, as I mentioned, is that what constitutes these outcomes and impact rests on the MSG. The MSG has that ability to define that and monitor it by themselves. Over to you, Doc.
Yeah, thank you very much. We still have some time for interactions, like 15 minutes, about 15 minutes more. So if you have questions to address, but just to emphasize the point again, in terms of the responsibility lying on MSG, if you remember, we need to always be referring back to the theory of change. What's the whole essence of what we are doing? We are MSG members, we are at the level where we make those strategic decisions. We put the strategic plan together. So if you go back to the strategic plan that you have, all the agreed objectives were targeted at some impact. So at the national level, we should be looking at whatever we are doing, whether we are staff of Neiti or member of MSG, eventually, what will this activity result in that justifies the essence of Neiti in Nigeria? So this is where you can look at and you start seeing, okay, so what is the impact? So, but remember that sometimes there are certain things you do, right, that you might not conclusively determine how much impact they are making. But if you have a good monitoring framework in place, they will keep gathering those results, and you hear, things. There's no day that you turn on your TV or turn on the radio or look at the newspaper that you don't see one activity or the other happening around Neiti. It's probably somebody trying to do a further research on a published report, and that leads to something. So that needs to be captured as well, because if Neiti did not publish the report, that particular activity probably wouldn't have happened, and the rest of that. I don't know if anyone is following the very interesting conversation going on around 13% derivation, right? So there are a lot of researchers out there, civil society organizations who have, taken it up on their own, even though these are figures yet to be published by Neiti. But let's remember that Neiti started those publications around FSAID, and that's what is motivating the kind of conversations going on here. So somewhere in the outcomes and impact template, we should see a reference to that kind of debate that is going on now, and see a connection to Neiti. And Neiti, sometimes we encourage EITI local implementation to be opportunistic. This particular conversation, Neiti should be at the center of it, even though we have not captured that as part of reporting process. But there has to be some way of also capturing that conversation within the Neiti framework. Yes.
Sorry, just to clarify that, the 13% derivation will be our next target on FASD. We could have done it now, but this report is falling within the election period. We didn't want politics to be attached to it. So the next report we are going to do will be on FASD would target 13% derivation. But secondly, before my colleague speaks, I will also need him to guide us, since his own is on impact and outcome. We have 2020 report on ground, and I hope he's listening. We have 2020 report on ground, and if we're able to get the extension we're asking for, we would have published our 2021 report. So, but if we choose to use 2020 report, against since dissemination of 2021 may not have commenced fully, what will be the implication? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the event we had yesterday. Neiti took upon itself to review the peer, and good progress has been made. For example, yesterday, the implementation working group of the peer told us from the legal side that they have drafted about 6 regulations that now have been gazetted. Now, Neiti is part of the Secretariat of the IWG, and Neiti happens to be involved in all the committees. So in a way, Neiti had input in those regulations, and now they are not just regulations, they've been gazetted properly. There are some still yet to be gazetted, that work is being done. So I don't know whether these are the kind of things that we can lay claims on, because really, okay, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Gashimbaki, absolutely. That is what we also expect as input to the outcomes and impact component. So we expect the technical team to articulate that and say, Neiti participated as a member of this committee, and that has led to development of these disclosures. What will make it really exciting is also to say, because when Neiti is part of a committee or when Neiti is at the table, there are certain, should I say, expectations. So if Neiti's contribution now helps to strengthen the disclosure provisions, that makes it really exciting, because that is what Neiti can bring on board in a discussion of that nature. So highlighting that will be expected in that incomes and outcome component. Then Dr. Oji raised the issue of if validation is extended, whether 2020 reports will be used or 2021 reports will be used. Before Edwin comes in, we've also had that conversation, you and I said, let's not forget that the validation is also looking at the timeliness of the report. So there is a requirement dedicated to timeliness. Requirement 4.8 looks at how timely you have published your report. So you cannot delay a report because you want the old one to be, you want to be judged by the old one. So my encouragement will be as quickly as possible, even if you can release it today, fine. If you can publish your 2021 today, the earlier, the better. That's what we will address, we will advise. However, you also have opportunity, because we know that the 2020 report was released about March of this year. So there are gaps that can be quickly addressed through the 2021 report. So this will be my straightforward answer to you. And I think, Edwin, you can also comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oji, for that question. And thanks very much for the response, Dr. Mike. I fully agree with you on where we stand in terms of our encouragement around timeliness. And I must say that the main area that will be looked at in terms of assessing the requirements would be the transparency templates. And if you see the transparency template, it is a document that the MSG can fill by yourself, just like the other templates. So if a question is asked around revenue, so around, especially on the contextual information, and you want to make reference to the 2020 information or 2018 information for that matter, or at least since the last validation, you can make reference to all reports since the last validation. But as Dr. Mike mentioned, what is often rewarded is the most updated information, which might be, in your case, for example, the 2021 information. So as much as we can be able to get that published, then we can know that the forward-looking element, as the EITI put it, the most recent information has been produced. And in the case of Indonesia, which is one of the countries I used to lead, under flexible reporting, they did provide a lot of new information even before, that was quite timely, even before their validation kicks off. So very likely they will be adjudged for being timely in terms of their reporting. But the last thing that I want to say, though, is that the timeliness is still based on a 2-year lag, right? So if you're basing it on 2020 data, which was published in time, and you don't manage to publish 2021 data, and the validation kicks off, per the requirement, you are still timely because you're still within the 2-year lag in terms of financial disclosures within fiscal years. So I don't think there will be any punishment for that, but there will be a reward for being even more timely than 2020, thereby by providing your 2021 disclosures. And if I would go even be more provocative, say give some 2022 disclosures as early as much as possible. Thank you very much, and over to you, Doc.
Thank you, Edwin. Any further questions? I expected someone to follow up on the effectiveness and sustainability extra points. How can Nigeria maximize those extra points? Or do we think we are in a good place to maximize those extra points? The extra points awarded for effectiveness. Can you bring up the slide, Edwin, for effectiveness and sustainability? Okay. Okay.
But I want to see the slide. All right. My question is simple. I want to find out if the validation template and exercise has a provision where countries identify new frontiers, things they are doing that is not within the core expectations of the validation process and template. For instance, in Nigeria, we are more like trying to go beyond the central office, and we are expanding, trying to have regional, subnational offices. You know, some of those things. Is there a provision for that reportage, and does it attract extra scores?
Well, yes, I think any effort towards expanding EITI implementation will be recognized as progress. So again, the responsibility is for the MSG to articulate what has happened, what you have done, and the impact that has also resulted in, to say we were able to expand to subnational levels, and this is how we did it, and this is what it has led to. So my simple answer will be yes, it will be recognized as progress. The extent to which it will attract extra marks, I cannot completely say, but it is in that direction. That if it is clear and the evidence is there that this expansion has led to some sort of impact at subnational levels and all that, that will be recognized clearly. Edwin, do you want to bring up that effectiveness and sustainability slide just one more time?
Can you see my slide?
No, we can see your handsome face.
I think I'm sharing
yes.
my
No, it's gone off now.
Yes, so exactly. Just wanted to make the point that yes, this is exactly the space for it. So if in your outcomes and impact template, there is an opportunity for you to demonstrate the different areas where new frontier issues have been championed by the MSG. I think the key here is demonstrating relevance. So whatever you're doing to document that, is the relevance of that issue to general extractive sector governance, or is it to broadening civic space, or is it to making sure that data is actually used, or is it to inform policies and practice? So find a space within here to connect that, and you'll be able to get some extra score for that. And I'll give a specific example because I like to talk about examples of how can you do that. In Malawi, there was a case of corruption in an awarding of license, a renewal of license where some government officials were mentioned to have taken bribe. The case came to the civil society organizations. They brought it to the MSG, and the MSG decided, basically, when the MSG did not act on it, the civil society almost blocked the publishing of that report that year. So the MSG had to include some disclosures around the case in their reports. Fast forward, the case ended up with the Anti-Corruption Bureau that year. And the documentation of that, the Anti-Corruption Bureau picked that up, did an investigation. As of last week, 2 officials have actually been arrested in relation to that case. Now, that was a case that was a tricky case when you look at it in the Malawi MSG. But for validation, whilst the EITI standard does not specifically talk about anti-corruption per se, as you know, the MSG documented how their platform was used to channel an anti-corruption case to the Anti-Corruption Bureau for redress, just by documenting that this was one of the main issues where Malawi scored an extra point, particularly around making EIT implementation relevant for their contest. So they turned something that could have been potentially negative to a very positive score for them in their validation. And I think that's something that Nigeria has a lot of work that you've done on frontier areas that you can demonstrate relevance and get some extra score for.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Edwin. Do we have examples of EFCC or ICPC using data or information from the EITI, Nigeria EITI reports to, follow up on anti-corruption cases? Do we have examples?
Yes.
We don't have any one of them in the outcomes and impact template as they are now.
What about public hearings at the national hearing?
Yes, that needs to be there. Yes. Yes, I saw that. Okay.
And Doc, maybe very quickly, there's an example I've picked up that might be useful to check in. We had a training with the the Commissioner of CAC, Dr. Abubakar in Accra, together with other Registrar Generals in the region. And I think the representative from the minerals regulator, if I'm not mistaken, made a point about how the implementation of beneficial ownership regime had helped to retrieve a certain amount of revenues because of addressing revenue leakage. I'm not so sure about the story, but I think this is an interesting case that would be good to learn more about, to see whether Neiti, because of your leading role on BO, played any role and could attribute any of that outcome to the role that Neiti played. And that definitely is one of those examples. And again, the many examples of how Neiti has contributed to retrieving revenues through your remedial action. Definitely, these are areas where you could score extra points, particularly around this issue of national relevance of EIT implementation.
Yes, that example is already in the outcome that impacted that.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to add to outcome and impact, the environmental reporting in our reports, we may need to take up a different strategy in environmental reporting, because the environmental laws have clearly stated and mandate all oil operators in Nigeria to do weekly and monthly monitoring. And disclosure in that area is not out there in the public domain, because those reports are to be submitted to the regulators. And if Neiti can lay hands on those reports and make disclosure, the companies that don't carry out those environmental monitoring will be forced to do that. Take, for instance, Chevron, the IOCs, mostly they do, but the local companies hardly could do. But if there is disclosure, they will be forced to carry out those kind of the activities that they are mandated to do. So if Neiti in our audit report captured that, and by way of outcomes and impact, it will add to the value of what we have. Normally, DPRO, which is the upstream regulatory, the commission now, yes, they are supposed to handle that. So reports are to be sent to them on monthly basis, because there's no how you'll be producing crude oil and gas and there is no impact. So there is a law on ground mandating all companies to do environmental compliance monitoring weekly, aggregate to monthly, and submit.
Awowo, okay. Okay, Mr. Awowo, Christian, right? Christian. Mr. Awowo Christian, who represents the South region, has highlighted a very important point about environmental reporting through Neiti reports. That is covered, but not covered to the point about these new regulations and the new laws. But more importantly, what I will say is, and I hope that the board is noting this, well, he is also a member of the board, to encourage the responsible agency to systematically disclose, right? So it is nice and fine if they can, if Neiti can play that role through the EITI reporting, but it is actually more effective if the board can take up this responsibility. I'm saying this because Dr. Gashimbaki, you wanted responsibilities for the board. This would be fantastic if we get to just include that in the templates, that these things are systematically disclosed. Go to NUPRC website, the information is out there, and this is the link. That's all. That way, you even score more points under validation than just waiting for the EITI reporting process. That's the point I wanted to make. But thank you very much, Edwin. We have to thank you as well. It's already past the hour. Yes.
Thank you very much for the time, and have an amazing rest of the time in audio discussion. Wish you the very best and looking forward to subsequent work ahead of Nigeria's validation.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. It's tea break now. We want to take just 20 minutes and have tea break and then come back for the next session. Apologies for, making the presentations tight and so quick. Hopefully we might have time to have more detailed engagements, but let's just quickly have tea and come back and continue. Yeah, just 2 more left. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.